Hi, I'm Tim from Marathon Mates. Welcome to episode number 39 of the Flying RuNR. This week, Tara and I start our taper in the lead up to the big event in Boston in a couple of weeks' time. On this episode, we're going to share our tips and tricks to ensure you learn how to taper for your next big event and to maximize your performance on the big day. Are you ready to run? Let's go.
Welcome to the thrilling world of the Flying RuNR, brought to you by the Marathon Mates.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Flying RuNR Podcast. On this episode, we'll be talking about tapering. Now, I know there are all sorts of rules and theories around what a taper should and shouldn't look like, and I know some people have very strict ways around what their taper should be. So we're here to help provide our tips around tapering so that you can run your very best race next time you're out there in the racing world. Getting a good taper prior to a race will make you feel bulletproof on the starting line. However, it can be quite difficult to get it done right, especially when there's long haul flights as well. So we're going to share our tricks to make sure it all goes to plan. But before we go any deeper into the world of tapering, I better introduce our other hosts that are on the line, Tony and Tara. G'day, guys. How are you doing? And what have you been up to this week?
Shall I go first?
Yeah.
Well, park run number 2, so I must be a veteran, and down at Capella, and it was really pleasing actually because as I may have mentioned in some of the podcasts, a group of workmates are now doing park runs, so they chose to do my local park run. So with Park Run 1, I had you guys and some other friends from the Flying RuNR, and then Park Run number 2, there were workmates there. So this park run seems okay. So
You'll be hooked before you know it. You'll be planning out trips around your park runs. You'll be making sure you know where the nearest park run is at all times. You'll be looking for coffee shops nearest to a park run somewhere to catch up with people afterwards.
I think it'll probably disappear, I guess, once we start getting back into some long running on a Saturday. But at the moment, it's cool. And what was really, really cool also is that my park run PB it's becoming a thing. Park run number 1, PB. Park run number 2, PB. So,
but it's along to next week's one, and he can pace you for the next one, hey?
Yeah, well, this is the thing, right? So on Saturday, I went 30 minutes and 20 seconds. So I'm thinking to myself, I haven't broken 30 minutes for a 5K since 2019. So I'm thinking to myself, do I go again at Capella and try and bust that 30 minutes, or do I just get out and find another park run to go to? So this weekend will be interesting. I don't know where I'm going. I think the workmates are going to find a park run between Brizzy and the Gold Coast. So I might just do that, take some pressure off. But yeah, I'm enjoying it. I've got to be honest. So.
And that's what parkrun's all about. It's not about getting a PB every week. It's about just enjoying it and being with people that you can be with and enjoying it, which is what Tim and I did on our Saturday parkrun. We went to Mitchelton because I got to catch up with a friend of mine, Anita, who I catch up with randomly when she's available. And when she messaged me to say that she was free, I'm like, yep, let's do it. So it was good. We got to catch up with her on Saturday, do parkrun. And we did our last long run. Well, it wasn't really a long run. It was only 25 Ks. So, yes, it's a long run, but didn't really feel like a long run. It was actually
only 25 Ks.
Well, after training in long conditions, 25 as a taper is actually quite nice.
Last kilometre, what was it, 5 minute something pace, really low, and her fastest time was around about 4:40 pace for that last kilometre. That was how fast she got it up to. So
I sprinted the last kilometre at 4:40 pace, I think it was. So
you've still got a fuel in the tank and strength in the legs. So 25 kilometres is a good little hit out. Now we commence our taper and we really just slow everything right down.
In all honesty, it was raining and it was very, very windy, and I just wanted to get out of both. So I wanted to get home for my breakfast. I was like, I want food. So it was nice. And we caught up with marathon mates for lunch on Saturday. So that included Tony, obviously. Sharon was unfortunately unwell, but we caught up with Terry Frew, who we've had on the Flying RuNR before. We've had Kay on the Flying RuNR. We caught up with her as well. And Jed, her husband, but unfortunately a few others weren't available. But it was a nice lunch at the Bricky Creek. So
well-taste Breakfast Creek Hotel. Great steaks and great beer. So we also developed a new measurement for running on the weekend as well. So when the weather apps now will tell you about, it's 25 degrees Celsius with a real feel of 27 or 28 degrees because they take into account the humidity and other factors to give you a real feel. Well, we've introduced the real feel concept into running. So when we ran out 12.5 Ks, we had the wind behind us for a little bit. And then as we turned, the wind actually got a lot stronger and we ran into a fairly strong headwind on the way back. So we think the 25 Ks we ran on Sunday was a real feel of 27 kilometres of running. So it's probably the equivalent of a 27K run with the extra headwind that we had to run into.
There was a lot of resistance training there, that's for sure.
Yeah, so that's the new. So if you start hearing people talking about, I did 20 Ks, but it was a real feel of 22 Ks, or I did 5K park run, but it was a real feel of about a 3K park run. It started here on this podcast.
I'm just thinking about that last 10K we did before Tokyo that felt like 25. So is that something similar?
A real feel of 25. There you go. So it's a new concept in the measurement of running, and you can adjust it as much as you want, and nobody can really doubt you for it. So there you go. So that's our catch up for the week. So thanks, guys. Now, as usual, it's time for that weekly news, and hope. As we always do, we look around the world of running to bring you news from this great sport that we love. Tony, what's been happening this week?
Well, I'm wearing my Boston shirt from 2023 for a reason, and it must be really getting real now for you guys because bib numbers were released this week for the marathon, as well as the corral and the wave numbers. And I know there are so many people that have been itching and waiting to get these to understand at what stage of the race they're going to start. The participant handbook was also released. It's getting close now. It's getting real close now. And I've seriously got to ask you guys, you guys have done this so many times, getting ready, getting prepped, being planned for all of your international marathons that you've done or the travels that you've done. But Tara, I've got to ask, how are you feeling? And most importantly, how's that corral and wave looking like at the moment for you guys? Are you happy with where you are?
Yeah, look, in all honesty, Tony, I never read the participant handbook of any race ever. And I will be completely honest there. I have Tim, he's my personal secretary. He will do that for me. And he tells me the need to know stuff.
It's true. It's true. Tara's never read a word of any handbook ever.
If I need to carry something, he tells me what I need to do. So it's a bit like our training plan. If he tells me I'm doing 25 Ks, I do 25 Ks. I really, I don't question these things. It just happens. It's a bit like flying. I don't bother with my passport. Tim does that. But in all honesty, Look, we knew we were going to be in the very last wave. That was inevitable. As a tour group participant, you get put in the very last wave, which I think we're in wave 4.
Yep.
And because Tim and I, we didn't put times in on purpose. We're just like, oh yeah, whatever. We'll just start wherever. We were put into corral number 6. So there's 9 corrals out of wave 4. So we're really, really at the very back there of the pack of everything. Not stressing at all about it. It's going to be a party at the back. We're going to have some fun. Going to catch up with Robert Wang from our previous episode because he's in there with us. But in all honesty, it'll just be a bit of fun. Tim and I, as most people know, we don't take our majors seriously. As long as we make the cutoff, we're happy. There's got to be places that we can take some photos. We'll go through the screen tunnel, get some photos there, do all the normal things that we always do. Yeah, I think it'll be fun. It'll be great. Yeah.
Still 42.2 kilometres. It doesn't matter what time you start. And I think for us, we have an 11:15 a.m. start time. So that's unique and different for us. We're used to early morning race starts. So 7, 8 o'clock. I know in the majors that can be a little bit later. I think Berlin was a little bit later, but 11:15 I think is the latest we've ever started a marathon before. So that might be a little bit different for us on the stomach and when to eat and what to eat in the morning for breakfast, but I think we'll be fine.
But in all honesty, looking at the weather, I think when I looked at the weather today's weather was only 2 degrees with a real feel of 0. So, if it warms up a little bit before race start, I'm not complaining. So, yeah.
Yeah, no doubt you guys will prepare pretty well because it is an early kickoff in the buses. It's an hour-long trip out to the start line. The corrals, let's hope the weather's kind for you because whenever it rains out there, it just turns to mud. So I'm sure you guys have I'm sure Tim has read everything he needs to read and that you'll be fully prepped. So
we'll be fine.
All right, let's moving on to another one of your favorite events, which is the Walt Disney Marathon Weekend. It's also known by many as the Dopey Weekend, but the dates for 2025 have just been announced. It is taking place from January 8th through to January 12 in 2025. Now, general registration for the public opens on April 9 at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, which is USA time, which is the East Coast. These events sell out incredibly quickly. So if you don't want to stay up to 2 a.m. and who does when you're my age? I mean, 2 a.m. Oh my God! I'm here in Australia to try and get your spot. There's always options, of course, to book through your travel through Traveling Fit. So it's held in Walt Disney World in Florida. And Tara, once again, I'm picking on you because this event, and you and Tim have done it, you loved it. What can our listeners or viewers expect in terms of what was the number one special memory that you took away from Dopey?
Oh, look, I've got so many of them, but I was actually reminiscing with Kay. So Kay has just completed this year's Dopey, and we were reminiscing about it. But I think the 2:30 get up in the morning for every race was a bit of a killer. But no, honestly, if you do want to do the Dopey Challenge here in Australia, I do recommend going through Traveling Fit. They organise it so well. You all stay in the same hotel. Everything is organised. You don't have to worry about trying to make sure that you've got the right time frames and that you're trying to organise accommodation and buses and all of those things in a different time zone. It just happens for you. The 4 days, you just get up and you just follow everybody else along. You've got a tent to go into. I highly recommend it to anybody, though, that wants to do it. If you do want to do it, get in, do it. Yeah,
you got to do this one. This is one of those bucket list weekends / marathon events that you've got to do at least once. The memories are awesome. The people you meet along the way are awesome. And again, if you listened to Robert Wang last week and you heard about the amount of things you can do during a marathon. Step off course, go and ride a few rides. I think he said the most he did in 1 year was 8 rides in the marathon. It's one of those fun events. It's a quirky little event that has really good bling. It has really good, support by the Run Disney organisation, and it's just set up really well. It's probably one of the best events we've ever been to as far as organisation goes.
And I think K34 on the marathon, there was chocolate.
Yeah.
Like they had this whole big table of just chocolate, and I couldn't stomach it while I'm running, but Tim took out.
I'm just grabbing handfuls of it all and just putting it in my little spy belt and munching on it. So it was great.
Yep.
That sounds nothing like you, Tim, at all. So, hey, before we go into the next piece of news, I did read that Jack Rayner, and Jack's one of my favourite runners. He's got the big porn star moustache, and I've seen him run so many times at Sunshine Coast and Gold Coast halves. So he shattered the Australian 10,000 metre record. He did that in 27:09:57, which is awesome.
Yeah.
But he was chasing to beat 27, so he had to beat 27. And I read somewhere he had to do that for automatic qualification for the Olympics. So even though 27:09 is the new Australian record, he actually didn't meet the qualifying standard from what I understand. And if I've got that wrong, I apologize, Jack, but great effort. But it just sort of shows, and I suppose a bit indicative of what I'm just about to talk about, because Tim shared today that the World Athletics are going to raise the marathon standards for 2025 World Champs, and the standards, and they've been leaked to the social media, and the qualifying standards seem to be a lot tougher. For example, the women's marathon entry is expected to increase by 3 minutes and 20 seconds to 2:23:30, and previously it was 2:26:50. The men's marathon is expected to increase by 1 minute and 40 seconds to 2:06:30 from its previous mark at 2:08:10. Now, in terms of what this means, it means that the quality of the field is obviously going to improve, but at the same time, it's going to be detrimental to many, many athletes and countries as they won't have qualifiers. And for example, Australia at the moment, Brett Robinson currently holds the Australian record of 2:07:31, which is like a full minute off the qualifying time. So in the women's, we would have a couple of qualifiers. Sinead Diver currently holding the Australian record at 2:21. And there seems to be this deluge of really fast marathon times at the moment. But I'm a little bit mixed feelings about this one. I understand improving the quality of the field and, to have an international marathon and having, the vast majority of the field now beating 2:08, but then still having some stragglers that are coming in at 2:26, for example, may not be a good look. But by the same token, it's going to make it really challenging for a number of countries. And Tim, I guess, what's your thoughts around this?
Yeah, I have to agree. When I read that, I was like, oh, that's awesome. It's a representation of what's happening in the sport. The times are getting quicker. But then, when I started to think about it and put it in context of, say, Australia and what's happening here in Australia and with our times, we don't have the volume of runners like a lot of those East African countries do, which are, they've got multiple people that are running fast. And I think to the sport overall, it will be very detrimental if, people can't qualify for world championships, and these flow on to other things like Diamond League events or even to Olympics going forward. It really means that there's a massive divide in the sport, and for some of those lesser known countries to go and compete at a world championships or a Olympics is a huge deal for those athletes. They may not be podium finishers, they may not even be in the top 10 or top 15, but it's huge in their country that they've qualified and made it to a world championships just doing that alone. So I think the sport's got to be careful that they don't try and push the standards too far up, that it becomes almost elite. I get what they're trying to do. The World Championships used to be quite prestigious for a marathon runner. It's not anymore, because it's not an event where they would generate a lot of prize money, if any prize money from it at all. And when you've got the likes of the majors where they're competing for maybe $100,000 US if they win it, and then there's extra bonuses and things like that involved, some of those runners, if they win an event, could walk away with $250,000, $300,000 US dollars with their sponsorship money and everything else. So you win one of those every year, and you're in good step. So I don't know. I'd like to see the World Championships improve its prestigiousness, but I also like to make sure that every country has got a chance to be able to compete in it too. What about you, Tara?
Yeah, I 100% agree. Like, you look at Eric the Eel with swimming and stuff like that. He had no chance at all of, getting anywhere close to, the leaders. But it's still something that he got to do and was proud of, and the whole world was behind him. And I think it's an important thing for encouraging the future athletes or the future children to actually be participating in sport as well. So I don't think winning is always everything on these things. Yeah,
representing your country means something. So
that's right.
Whether that's going to be at a 2:24 marathon pace for men, or I agree with you. I think that it is just it's a reaction to what's happening in terms of times and pace, of course, but I think maybe too much of a reaction to what's happening in terms of time. So I think they're missing how hard someone works to represent Australia in men's marathon. I mean, you hear, for those listeners that listen in or follow someone like Brett Robinson on Strava, the work that he puts into and how much pride he has in representing our country, and to have that taken away because of some arbitrary qualifying projective to keep the race elite, I think sends pretty much the wrong message about what running's about. So
yeah, I also look at that time for the men's 2:06:30. The US is one of the biggest, well, it is the largest athletics track and field country in the world, right? Has huge names, huge money going through their programs. I don't actually think they would have an athlete that could run 2:06. Actually, I don't think they do in the marathon. If they did, it would only be maybe one or two at the most that could do it. So,
well, they only had two runners qualify in terms of times for the new Olympic standard. So that's 100% correct on your part, Tim. They would not have a runner.
Yeah. So it would be. I wonder how the sponsorship dollars will go with that in the background to try and entice the standards to stay low. But anyway, it's beyond our level of control. I guess we're never going to run that fast. We're never going to qualify, and I don't really want to run that fast. But
you can't take photos if you're running that fast.
I wouldn't need to speed the videos up that I take to 10 times speed, because you would better watch it in a reasonable time frame. But anyway, so thanks, guys. That's the news this week. So thank you, Tony. This week we're talking about tapering. So before we get into the discussion, I'll give you a bit of a breakdown on what tapering actually is. So for those that don't know, tapering is really the practice of reducing your exercise in the days leading up to an important competition. It's generally something that happens predominantly in long distance sports and definitely in long distance running, such as marathons. And it can lead to a significant period of time. Sometimes it can be a few days, sometimes it can be a few weeks. And as I said, it really is dependent on the runners themselves. It can generally last about a week for most people, but I know for Tara and I, it's a lot longer. But really, it's about reducing the exercise over that period of time, reducing the impact and the load on the body, and giving your body some time to rest up before the big day. So that's essentially what a taper is, and we'll go more into that now. But it is important to say we're not experts in tapering. We're only going to share tonight what our experience is with tapering. We always talk about comparison is the thief of joy, and just because something works for Tara and myself, it may not work for Tony, and Tony may have his own strategies. So what we are saying is just our opinions tonight, but take of it what you feel is important, and try and incorporate it into your world when you're tapering for your next distance. So what we're going to do tonight, we're going to I'm going to ask about 10 questions, and we'll go backwards and forwards between Tony and Tara, and they'll talk about their experiences and answer each of the questions. So I'll start off with the first question. What does a typical taper period look like for you guys? How long does a taper period last? I'll start with you, Tara.
Okay. So, look, Tim and I run together for our majors. We do all of our long runs together. However, Tim could probably run a long run, like say 30 kilometres the week before a marathon, and quite happily run that marathon at the right speed that he wants to run it at. If I did that, I would die at 25 Ks and not be able to run the rest of the marathon. So
figuratively, done.
Yeah, well, figuratively, yes, not literally. And I've learnt this over the years with myself personally, of overtraining to a point where I shouldn't be training anymore, and then I do not do well in the marathon. I find we're about 3 weeks out now, I think, from Boston, 2 weeks by the time that this episode hits. I've just done 25 Ks, as I mentioned earlier. That'll be my last run, so 3 weeks out. And next week I'll probably do maybe 18, depending on how my body's feeling. I sort of just go by feel now as to how I'm going. I don't put a lot of speed work into anything now. Everything now is just about maintenance and keeping those legs ticking over. So there'll be no speed work happening anymore. There'll be no more long runs where I'm pushing hard. It'll just be some strength work up until probably about a week or so out as well. So I'll continue my strength work up until then. But the running will really ease it back a bit. But yeah, as I said, everyone's different. What about you, Tony? What do you do for yours?
Well, I think our Tokyo taper was probably the best one that we've ever done. And what that looked like was 3 weeks prior to the race was our last really long run. I think we did a 32. 2 weeks out, we did a 25, and then the week before, we run a 10K. And I jokingly refer to that 10K as being the toughest, because in my mind, I was saying it's only a 10K. And so that's part of the challenge that we sort of had. And I think for me, the aim of a taper is to be on that line fresh, but knowing that you've done the work. And I think that just worked for us. It was a stage taper down, so 32, 25. Actually, it might have been a 22. So 32, 22, 10. And then I know one of the questions is going to be about final week. So, but 10 was pretty much our last. Could you call it a long run? Yeah. So that was probably our last long run prior. And really, for those 2 weeks where you go from 32 to 25 to 10, there not a lot changes in what we're doing. We're still maintaining our weekly load, which is we're up of a morning and we're doing, a small walk or a small run. We're still doing our strength exercise. So really the taper, the only thing that changes for us is that until the final week, of course, but the only thing that really changes is just the length of the long run.
Yeah, and I think that's the same. It's really about reducing the impact and the load on the body, but still doing something. So it's more about just slowing everything right down is what I find. You've preempted the next question, which is great. So in that final week, so we've talked about a 3 week taper. So you're 1 week out, and those days leading into the race, what would you typically focus on in your taper during that time? Not just running, but also food and hydration wise as well.
Well, for me, that last week is really just about that feeling I want on the start line. So I want to be refreshed and I want to be rested. So we might limit. We typically don't run that last week of taper, and we'll walk. We'll do walking instead. So we'll go for our morning walk, and usually we're traveling. Come Wednesday or Thursday of the week usually. So we know it's a shortened week in terms of prep. Nutrition, we're not really doing a great deal different, to be honest. We're probably taking in a couple of extra carbs or, not really skimping on the bread, that sort of thing. So, so nutrition wise, nothing really changes. We're hydrating to a much greater effect. So usually before a long run, we'll get our hydration fluids and we'll start just adding them to our water on the Thursday and the Friday before a long run, just so that we're starting to get some hydration into our system. And we're doing that for the last week. But so we're fundamentally not doing a lot in terms of exercise or anything, just wanting to get relaxed and confident. And then from a food-wise sense, if I was thinking that I should be on a diet, I've sort of pushed all that aside and I'm just eating maybe a couple of extra carbs. And then once we jump on a plane, or if we're not jumping on a plane, it's just that hydration process, just making sure that I'm feeling pretty good. And then of late, and this is only something that we've started to do since Boston, to be honest, is we try and do a 5K run prior to the day before the marathon. So just to do a bit of a slow jog, shake out the travel and all that sort of stuff. So I know it's not overly exciting, but that's our last week of the taper, because that feeling at the start line is the one that we really want. So Tara, from your perspective, what does that last week look like for you guys?
Yeah, well, look, we're very similar to you too, Tony. Obviously we fly out usually around the same time, like the Wednesday, Thursday. This time around, we're flying out on the Thursday because the race isn't until the Monday, being Patriots Day in America. On the Sunday beforehand, we'll do just a gentle, I don't know, maybe 5 to 8K, just a gentle jog type thing. Monday, we'll do our stretch and strength session as always, and just slow it back on the rest of the runs that we do for the rest of the week. So Tuesday morning and Wednesday morning, we'll still get up and run, but it'll just be a very easy run. We do drink more water, though, leading up to that marathon. So it's not a lot of extra water, maybe like an extra 250 mils or so per day. And that's just to keep that hydration going. And this is going to sound weird, because with Berlin, we were drinking beer as our hydration, but I do try and taper out the alcohol for the week prior to before a marathon. Berlin was a completely different
and it worked. You ran your fastest major.
It's true. So maybe I should be carb loading on beer. But anyway, no, I don't add any extra food in. If anything, I actually reduce things out of it like that. Don't agree with my stomach, because I do have sensitive stomach when I'm running. So I do. I don't go and put anything oily or fatty into my system. Not that I eat a lot of that sort of stuff already, but I bring back all the chocolate ice cream. I don't have any of that sort of stuff leading up to a race. I stick to really plain, bland food for the week or so beforehand, just to make sure everything goes well.
Yep. And I guess the other thing to do in that week beforehand is sleep. Yep. You're reading my mind.
Sorry. Sleep.
It is important to catch up on sleep. You want to be fresh on the start line. So fresh is not just cleansing your system internally with good food and water and reducing the exercise. It's about getting the sleep as well, and going to bed that maybe half an hour earlier every night, and just trying to sleep a little bit longer. We've mentioned traveling, and it can be hard to maintain that routine, particularly on long haul flights. I know for us, traveling to Boston, it's something like a 26-hour journey door to door. And then we arrive in the morning at 7 o'clock in the morning, and we can't check into the hotel till 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So it can be a bit disruptive. So what sort of tips do you have when you're traveling to ensure that your taper still continues along the same lines?
Nutrition wise, I don't even worry about it, because I know that whatever I'm going to eat is not going to be a worry for me. So, a lot of people whinge about and complain about airline food. It's food. It does the job. I don't worry about it. I just eat what's there. I probably, like many people, eat probably too much, because you'll go on the plane with some snacks and some lollies and all that sort of stuff. And so, but the key is I just don't worry about it. But hydration is something I worry about. And so often if I'm flying, I might have one beer with dinner or something when it's being served, but most of the time I'm just sort of sipping water, which can be a bit frustrating for the people around, because that means you're probably up and down a little bit to use the bathrooms. But I just try and just maintain a pretty clear focus on just going with the flow while I'm traveling. I'm not going to get stressed about too much. I'm not going to worry about what I'm eating. I'm not going to look at things like carb content. If it looks good, I'll probably eat it on the plane, because usually we're there, at least 2 days before the race. So if something has gone wrong, there may still be the chance that I'll be able to fix it. But I just go with the flow now while I'm traveling. Just try and get as much rest as I can, and just try and stay hydrated on the plane would be my big tips, based on what I've experienced. You guys?
I know that with us, we tend to book our flights on purpose so that we travel through the night. So if it's nighttime, if it's dark, we sleep. If it's light, we stay awake. So, for example, this flight that we're taking to Boston, it's out of Brisbane at, I don't know what time.
10 o'clock at night.
Thank you. 10 o'clock on Thursday night. So we will go to sleep on that flight over. We will hit, is it Philadelphia?
LA.
We
land in LA 14 hours later. So we'll try and get a good 8 hours sleep on that first flight. And we arrive in LA at about 6 p.m. Thursday night. So we go backwards in time.
Yep. And then the next flight over to Boston is obviously another nighttime.
From 11 p.m.
Yep. So we'll get more sleep on that one as well. So because it's such a disrupted sleep, when you're on a plane, if we can sleep as much as we can, then when we arrive at Boston on the morning, it's sort of almost like we've had a full night's sleep within that 26 hours anyway. So we try and stay awake then for the whole day until that night, so that we just crash out on the night that we get there. I do drink a lot more water while I am flying. I do find I get very dehydrated flying anyway, so I do like to have some zero tablets or hydration tablets if I can. But yeah, just reducing the salt intake especially. But airline food, I'm the same as you, don't really worry too much. But if it's something creamy or something like that, I'll probably eat a little bit less of it than what I normally would. But yeah, we just try and stick to the routine of, if it's morning, like we try and get back into that time zone wherever we're flying to straight away to get our bodies adjusted so that we're not tired. Yeah. And
I think it's the days after you land, you're going to be tired for a day or two. So it's, again, catching up on that sleep, getting to bed early, sleeping in. The other trick we have is we take empty insulated drink bottles with us. If you're on YouTube or wherever you can see it on the picture at the moment, we take them with us. We fill them up at the airports before we board the flight after we've cleared customs. And generally that helps us so that when we're on the flight, we get a bit extra water with us as well. Where were we? Was it Dubai? They made us empty all of them, even though we're customs. So we had to scull all this water just as we were boarding the plane. But you've got to make sure you're hydrated. It does definitely dehydrate you. Staying off alcohol is a big thing. You'll still see on our social medias, we do like to have a drink before we depart, and that's usually to help us sleep. A glass of wine or a scotch or something like that isn't going to hurt us, 1 or 2 glasses, but it will help us sleep a bit better on the plane as well. That's the key ones there, I guess. Now, we've all made mistakes with tapers, and we've all heard of others doing the wrong thing with tapers. Have you guys got any stories around some of the mistakes that you've made in tapering?
To be honest, I probably the only mistakes we've ever made is not knowing how to taper probably correctly or what necessarily worked. Nothing's ever been incredibly bad for us in terms of that. So we used to taper and pretty much stop running there at one stage, and going 2 weeks even, I think, on one of the events where we just didn't run we still walked, but we just didn't run. So, but even that wasn't deadly. I mean, we had some hiccups, of course, with Boston. I've talked about them ad nauseum now, but the reality was that was more, it wasn't necessarily the taper itself that killed us. It was just some of the decision making that I had the days once we'd landed in the place. So no major mistakes from my end. So Tara, can you think of any from?
I probably wouldn't call them mistakes as such, but I do know that with the Melbourne Marathon, we decided that we were down there only literally for the weekend. We've been to Melbourne many times, but we were like, let's explore a bit more. And I think we walked 36,000 steps or something the day before the marathon. So not that it made a big difference, but I think we could have done a lot better if we hadn't have been walking around so much. I do know that we will always do a shakeout run prior to any marathons. So I actually find them very beneficial. Taking it easy. You feel like you're going really slow. You look at your pace and you're like, oh my goodness, I'm doing 5-minute pace here. You know that you're ready then for your marathon, because that's probably your first proper run that you've done in your taper time. But my biggest mistake would be running too far, too close to the marathon. And that's probably my biggest mistake. So I know a lot of people that are doing 34 kilometres next week for their long run. That's absolutely fine. That works for them. If I did that, I'd probably be going, no. But that's because I've done those kilometres earlier in the training sessions as well.
Yeah, and I think if I look back, particularly local races where you're working Monday to Friday and then you're doing stuff at home on the Saturday and then you're getting up really early to drive somewhere to then go off and do a race, you're probably not focusing on your sleeping patterns during the week. You're probably not focusing as much on your food. So it can be a bit problematic, some of those local races, trying to differentiate between normal life and your race day. I think when you're traveling overseas, you're well prepared. You get there a couple of days early, you can rest up. But for local races where they're happening on the weekend and you live your normal life right up until that moment, and then getting up early at 3 o'clock in the morning to get out somewhere to drive, it probably is more disruptive. And they're probably the mistakes we've made in the past, in that we've not necessarily focused on our taper properly at that time.
And that's actually true with Sunshine Coast, because we all drive up, pick up our race packs from the Sunshine Coast Marathon on the day before, because, I mean, it's only an hour up for us. And then we do a park run on that Saturday morning somewhere up the coast, drive home, and then we've come home and done gardening and housework and all the rest of it, then driven up again the next morning, but you have to be up at 3 o'clock in the morning and then run a marathon. And that's probably killed us
Mind you, the fastest marathon we ever did was Sunshine Coast, and we did exactly that.
Yeah.
And went to a friend's birthday party, 40th birthday party or
The
something.
night before.
The night before, and weren't home till almost midnight. So,
but just because that's worked for us in the past doesn't mean it's going to work for us in the next time, especially now that we're old.
So, Tony, do you incorporate any form of cross training during your taper, or do you think that would be a good idea to incorporate cross training into your taper?
We still do our stretch and strength stuff that we do during our normal week, so that doesn't necessarily change. On top of that, there's not a great deal of cross training that we do. We might jump on the exercise bike every now and again, or do some elliptical stuff, but I think primarily we just focus on just being active, but in a very relaxed way. So if it was raining during one of the mornings and we're just about to head out for a walk, we might just jump on the elliptical and just do a bit of a slow trending sort of a time on that or the exercise bike. I think it's a good idea. It keeps you active, it keeps you moving. But it's not necessarily something that we have as part of our plan. If it happens, it happens. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. So most of the time we're just, especially that last week, we really are just focused on just getting some blood flow, and maybe that's about it. So,
yeah, I'm the same. I take away all the heavier weight side of things, and then just use body resistance at a light repetitions about 10 days beforehand. So I'll stop all my reformer Pilates about 10 days prior to, because I put some pretty heavy springs on there sometimes. If I do it, it'll just be really, really light. But normally it's just like body weight, like lunges and stuff like that, like 10 days prior to, just to make sure that I've got that muscle strength there, but I don't need to overwork those muscles too hard.
Yeah. All right. And what would be the typical warning signs if you're pushing it a little bit too hard during your taper period?
I think heavy legs would be the biggest one for me. So if my legs are feeling heavy, I know that I've probably done too much or that there's something wrong. So when I did the 5K at Boston on the Saturday, my legs were really heavy. So I knew that it just didn't feel right. I felt like I was clodding as opposed to gliding.
Floating
over the roads as we do. But yeah, and the other thing I find, Tim, is that my sleep's interrupted. So if I'm having interrupted sleep and I'm tossing and turning, there's something telling me that I'm not getting the rest that I need. But and that could potentially be because I'm pushing myself too hard during that taper. But I look forward to taper because it gives me a chance to sort of slow down a little bit. So yeah.
Yeah, I know. I look forward to taper very, very much. It's I've got friends that we run into, and for the last 2 weeks we've run into Monica and Brian for each run, and I'm just like, I really hate this part of the training because you've hit that peak part of it where you're just like, why am I doing this again? And you start questioning your life choices on a Sunday morning. Why am I doing this in the wind and the rain rather than sleeping in and having coffee? But I do know it's all worth it. And now that we're on taper, it's very enjoyable to think that Sunday morning I don't have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and do 32 kilometres. I can just get up at 5 o'clock and do 12 or 18 kilometres. So no, it's just a whole different, yeah.
It's amazing how that getting up at 5 o'clock becomes a sleep in, doesn't it?
And it's really sad when 5 o'clock is your sleeping time.
And I know you weren't putting Monica and Brian down there. I know they're avid listeners to our show. We actually was quite great to see them because it actually slows us down and gives us a chance to stop and have a bit of a chat and to run with them as well for a period of time. So it helps distract through that time. Yeah.
Me going, I hate this running thing. Like,
Yes.
Yeah.
So hello to Brian and Monica who are listening.
Yeah.
All right. So speaking of heavy legs and speaking of just tiredness in general, one of the things we swear by as well is getting a massage in those final days before a marathon. Generally, it's about a week beforehand. We get a full remedial massage with Wayne, who's been on here before on one of the episodes. And that really helps clear all the lactic acid and the gunk out of our bodies before we do it. And we find that also helps when we're pushing it too hard. Our legs are tired. We get it cleaned out and we feel a lot better as well. But I know it can also be quite hard during taper to be mentally stimulated, I guess, knowing that it's a 3-week period. It can take a bit of time to get to the race day. It can be a bit, up and down at times because you're trying to slow things down and your body's wanting to go faster. You've got all this extra energy. Any tips or tricks for how you get through it, I guess, mentally during that time?
Not really. I think it's more of a case of just telling. Sometimes you feel very guilty for not going out and doing that speed session because that's what you've done for the last 12 weeks or 18 weeks or whatever your training period is. And so you can go on the treadmill and you're like, oh, I'm only running 10 kilometers an hour, or I'm going around the block at my 5K run and doing it in 35 minutes instead of 30 minutes. It sort of plays with your head a little bit to know that you're going slower than what you know you can go at. But I think you've just got to pull it back and just go, I'm doing this for a reason. This is beneficial to my body. But yeah, it does play with your head a little bit, knowing that what happens if I don't do it. I know I've gotten to race day before and gone, do I actually remember how to run? And I do actually have that paranoia with taper going, I hope I remember how to run properly on race day. That has actually happened to me before, where I'm like, I don't know if I know how to do this anymore. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think for me, that whole taper period from a mindset and a mental perspective really comes back to how well the training block has gone. So if I know that I've done the work and I've hit the targets and I've done the milestones and I've been pretty happy with my training block, that the taper from a mindset perspective is all about being fresh for the day, about being fresh and relaxed and confident at the starting line on the day. So that's a completely so that's the mindset that I've had it probably in my last 3 marathons, because I felt really good about where I've been and what I've done, and the taper's been part of that. Where it's different for me is if I haven't had a good training block, or it's been uninterrupted, or it's been disruptive, or it's been a distracted one, or that I'd set out for long runs and I'd pull up stumps, 3/4 of the way through, and so then the trick is to get away from that during the taper, because most of the time I'm going on in my mind, I haven't done the work, I should have done that, I should have got to this, time or milestone or distance or whatever it is. And then that can play havoc on you and can sometimes tempt you to say, well, I need to do one more long run to make up for everything that's going on. And I think the key for me in those times, and that was me probably prior to London Marathon, to be quite honest. I had a very disruptive sort of training block, and I really hadn't done the miles that I wanted to. And you've just got to put it out of your mind, because no matter what miles you've done, you've got miles in your legs and you've got miles in your bank. And doing an extra 15K over maybe a 3-week period is not going to help you a great deal on race day. It might help you mentally, but and it's really just about pushing those thoughts to the back and just enjoying the rest And I really like Kim Tudjman's comment she made when she came on the show, and she talked about sometimes she gives herself a choice during a long run or something. She said, well, I can either feel the pain on race day, or I can feel the pain a number of times during my long run to get to race day. And she says, well, I'll feel the pain on race day. And that's all about listening to your body and knowing what your body needs at the right time as well. So there's a little bit of logic in that. And I think that, if you're getting into that taper period and you're thinking you should be doing more, or should have done more, or you should keep going, or one more long run won't help, somehow you've got to push them aside and just focus on that feeling you want at the starting line of being relaxed, refreshed, and confident that what lies ahead of you is within your capabilities.
Yeah, 100%. Next question is paranoia a real thing? And if it is, what's the cure? So for those who don't know, paranoia is the fear of getting sick before a marathon. And we all have it. We all feel a little, and it might not be sick, it might be injured as well. We all have those little niggles, and they all play on your mind beforehand. So is it real? And if so, what's the cure, Tony?
Well, it can't be a real thing because you've just told me what it is, and up until then, I hadn't heard of it before. So it can't be a real thing. But I understand that it could be a real thing because, especially now post-COVID, we see a lot more people wearing masks, runners coming from international spaces. I know in Tokyo there was a large amount of international travelers, even within our group, that wore masks when they're out in the public. So I think it must be a real thing. I know myself, we picked up, and I still haven't got rid of it, to be quite honest, a bit of a throat issue between Berlin and Chicago, and a respiratory thing. So I don't believe it was COVID. We never got ourselves checked for COVID. It was just a tickly throat, and I've still got that. So I can imagine it's a real thing. But if it was a real
thing, anything through the camera, Tim.
Yeah, it's all right, Tim. I'm not going to give it to you, but it's also a continuation of some issues that I've had in terms of, just my respiratory thing. I've had them all my life. So it's one of the things that actually stops me doing the public speaking that I used to do, because, when my throat goes, it just goes. So, but yeah, I think it's a real thing, potentially, that people really do worry about getting sick, but I don't know if there's a cure for it. You've just got to take your precautions and stay healthy and stay confident. And,
most of it's not real.
I know Tim and I have always been these people that even before COVID, we were the weird people that would hand sanitize anyway beforehand, because we did not want to get sick prior to running. And being runners, I don't like missing training runs. I don't like missing out on doing things I love doing, which is running. So, and nobody likes being sick, but I'm pretty paranoid about getting respiratory issues. But not just being sick, it's more, I've got a twinge in my hamstring, or is that hip feeling a bit sorer than normal, or it's just those little things. Those things sort of start.
That's paranoia.
That's the paranoia kicking in. It's like it's always there, but you start feeling it more when it comes to marathon time. And I think that's probably what it comes down to. Yeah. Is that what you're thinking?
There's no cure for it apart from just saying it just is what it is. It's just the mind saying that you're ready to race. And I guess for me, I've already told people at work, don't come near me. I've got a bottle of hand sanitizer near my desk. I wash my hands with it thoroughly a couple of times every day.
You have to clean 20 as well and just spray your room before you go in.
I keep my distance, but at the same time, I've noticed at the moment my hamstring's a little bit tight. I've got to see Wayno anyway. I know that, and get a massage. But All those little niggles all come to the forefront of your mind. It's normal. It's part of the taper process. It all just comes through, and it's quite a common thing. So it just is what it is. I'm also mindful of our time at the moment, so I'm going to ask the last question now. And this one's around multiple events. So, Tony, you've run Berlin and then a couple of weeks later backed it up with Chicago. And Tara, I know you've done multiple events over multiple days. How do you do a taper when you've got multiple events in a couple of weeks or in a very short time? What's it look like for you guys?
I think from experience in Berlin, I think the key is, a lot of people were educating us on what to do and how to do it and giving us their thoughts, and all of that was wonderful. But ultimately, we did a 2-week taper into Berlin, and instead of what we would have preferred, a 3-week taper. And then fundamentally treated the period from Berlin to Chicago as another bit of a taper. So a lot of people will say, pick a race, treat one. So if so in my instance, if Chicago was the race, Berlin would have been potentially our last long run, and then we taper from there into Chicago. But in our case, we tapered into Berlin, and then we held that foundation of work. We did, I think the biggest run we did between Berlin and Chicago was about 8K. I think we ran 5K 3 times. There was a 5K race the day before the marathon, which we did, which I loved. The bobblehead hat was just awesome. I think you just it's a little bit of a mixture, I guess, but it depends on how serious you are. People do say choose a race and then choose the other one as either a recovery run or as a through race. So, but we tapered 2 weeks into Berlin and then held that and tapered a little bit more between Chicago. So, hopefully that helps.
Yeah. What about you, Tara?
Most of listeners know that Tim and I have done multi-day events several times now. So with the Dopey Challenge being 5K, 10K, half marathon, full marathon, 4 days straight. And then we do the Gold Coast double where you do a half marathon on the Saturday and then the full marathon Sunday. I always find between those sort of events, because they are so close together, just to ensure that you don't go and sit down and do nothing. So I learned my lesson, I think, on one of it wasn't Dopey Marathon because we did so much walking every single day there. It wasn't funny. I think it was my first double at the Gold Coast, and the half marathon, I'm like, cool, I'll just go and sit down and rest for the next day, thinking that I'm doing the right thing. The next day's marathon, I started out and I think it took me about 10 to 12 Ks before my legs actually felt like they were going to move for me. And that was my own mistake by just sitting down not sitting down, but I stretched and stuff, but then I rested. I should have gone for a 5K walk or a 2K walk and just that lactic acid out. I now go and do hot and cold therapy. So I'll jump into the spa pool at the resort and then get into the cold pool, and then I'll go for a walk afterwards as well. Just keep my body moving. Don't sit and rest for too long. If I am going to rest, I'll just have a quick 30, 40-minute nap and then get up and keep moving again. There's no,
I tell you what, the temptation to stop and do nothing would be real, but wouldn't it? So, and most people, and most people would be thinking that's what they need to be doing. So that's great advice, Tara.
All right, so we'll wrap up the discussion there around tapering. So hopefully everyone who's just listening at the moment has continued listening and taken some of those tips and information and hopefully incorporating it into their next big race. So,
well, I hope they're still listening because, as we always do before we finish up, Tim, we get your tip. So I hope they're still there because it's now over to you.
Thanks, Tony. My tip this week is a simple one. What is it? The 5 Ps or the 4 Ps, whatever you want to call it. Prior preparation prevents piss poor performance, right? So doing the training is one part of getting ready for the race, but the way you can taper or the way you taper can either mean that the training was worth it in the end or not. We spend so much of our time training and really putting the effort in on the track that if you don't prepare yourself in those last couple of weeks before the marathon, it can be a bit of a wasted effort. So focusing on rest, clean eating, sleep, and hydration is critical to success on race day, as we've discussed. As I said earlier, comparison is the thief of joy. So just because it works for Tara, myself, and Tony doesn't mean that it will work for you. So you need to work out what works best for you from a tapering perspective, and that takes time. It takes listening to us and listening to others and working out all the little bits and just tinkering with it as you go. But getting your body prepared, getting yourself ready for the big day will lead to more improved running performance and ultimately a success on race day. So again, prior preparation prevents poor performance. So that's the end of this episode. But before we do that, Tara, what's happening next week?
Oh, me again. Okay, thanks, Tim. Next week we have Rhys Williams joining us. Now, Rhys lives in Central Queensland as an ultra runner. He is known as the Bearded Runner, and we'll hear about Rhys, his journey in the world of ultra running and where it has taken him. So we can't wait to have him on the show. That'll be great.
Yay, thanks, Tara. Yeah, we can't wait to hear about Rhys's story. He reached out to us actually after we had Travis Island on talking about Run the World. So I'm really looking forward to hearing about Rhys's story because it is quite a special one. But that wraps up our episode tonight. Thanks, guys, for joining me tonight. Thanks, Tony and Tara. Tara, Boston's only a couple of weeks away now. We're getting excited, and that taper is hopefully under full control by the time this episode comes out. So thank you again, Tony. And video of this episode will be available at Spotify and YouTube, and audio will be available on Apple, Amazon, and most other popular podcast platforms. Now, if you like this episode, please like the episode on the platform you're listening to it and write a comment. Maybe you could tell us your tips and tricks to a good taper. Maybe share some of your ideas as well. So that'd be good. Now, remember, every step forward is a victory. Lace up, hit the road, and we'll catch you on the next episode of The Flying Runner. Until then, happy running.
Happy running.
Happy running.